Welcome back to When the Dutch Went to Space. This is episode number 17. 17 already. We're still playing RP-1 and we are going back to the moon. And this episode starts on the 1st of July in 1969 when Franco Malbera and Bertrand Dubois are launching from Surya Airbase in the Europa free launch vehicle. And yes, you have not seen this one before. This is a intermediary upgrade. As I explained before, my lunar infrastructure was woefully underestimated how long it would take to build everything up to get a Saturn V class of vehicle. So we did our first moon mission using two Europa 2 launchers, which are capable of putting 20 tons into orbit, and this one is capable of putting 33 tons into orbit, and it's still using most of the same components and tooling as it does on the Europa 2. It has gained 6 boosters on the first stage, but they're sort of welded against the main stage, and they're using the same diameter as the from Spike launcher, and they're sort of clustered together like the Proton does. The Proton looks like it has boosters, but they're not actually boosters. They're separate tanks welded toward the main tank, which is exactly as we are doing. So we only had to upgrade the avionics, and could reuse most of the parts, and that is what makes it possible to get this vehicle before 1970. You can see the first stage is almost burned out, and we are launching a Mediterranean crew to space this time on our ESA space launch system. You can see the humongous amount of Delta 7 engines on that first stage, and the second stage hasn't really changed, exactly the same, using the Vikings and the hypergolic fuel. And you've seen the third stage, maybe you've already spotted the third stage, which is still using Hydrolox, bringing us the performance that we need, and here you can see it in action. But it has an additional fourth stage, which we'll see when we do the TLI, and the fourth stage is an exact copy of the third stage, and that brings down production cost and boosts efficiency. So Bertrand Dubois, you've already seen him. He's been with the space agents since the early days when we had the Kuifje capsules and tried to figure out manned spaceflight. But Franco Malbera is an Italian astronaut. He was born in Genoa in 1946, so he is only 21 years or 23 years old, and he's an Italian ESA astronaut, which was a real life example, and he was the first Italian in space thanks to spaceflight STS-46, which happened in '92, so we're quite a bit ahead of them. And in that mission, 2 satellites were placed into orbit, and one of them is a very special one. The Europa is one of the very few uncrewed space vehicles that have been returned to Earth unharmed. And you can find it in a museum in Lucerne in Switzerland. Anyway, you can see we made a small inclination correction midway to make sure we end up at the right place, and we're doing a lunar insertion. Again, it's because we're heading for these specific targeted sites that we have to do for our contracts, much like Apollo did. And we are using a paddle-based design, much like the US is doing under Apollo style. And Bertrand is moving into the lander, and it's up to Franco to make the transition and docking, very similar like Neil and Buzz did on Apollo 11, and just or I should say will do on Apollo 11, because we're still a few days ahead of them. And you can see us flip around. We're targeting the Mare Imbrium, or which is Latin, of course, and it means the sea of showers or the sea of rains or heavy rain. It's kind of difficult to translate, but it's a fast lava-based plane, and the Imbrium Bazin is one of the it's in the northwestern hemisphere of the moon. You can see this little black spot on the upper right corner. You'd probably call it upper right corner. see us reuse every bit of fuel that we have as we make our way down, which allows us to incline our descent a little bit. And we're landing just a couple of degrees eastwards, no, westwards of the orbit of our Haddock spacecraft, which means that in about 1 day the Haddock spacecraft will catch up to us and we should be able to rendezvous back without much cost. But you can see Bertrand making a perfect landing here, and yeah, we can see him looking for the hatch and get out to make sure he does the science. So this is a targeted landing, and we've managed to land within 1 kilometer of our target space. And he, of course, very proud for all the French collecting all the science and stuff like that. And ESA in particular, but his own country, of course, in specifics, being the first French national to actually land over here. And you can see him hop up over there in the direction where he should go, but then remembers he still has to plant the national flag, which he's about to do, and only to discover that for some reason it's been mounted at a 90-degree angle, or maybe his Dutch colleagues have been playing a prank on him. But regardless, he's proud to post next to his flag and then head off into the far distance for a 800-meter walk, which will still take some time. I'll skip some of the footage, but we actually make it all the way down to the place we have to be, which turned out not to be really necessary. Like within 1 kilometer turned out to be fine for the contract, but maybe Bertrand just loved to stretch his legs on this amazing surface. And after having observed the spot, he walks all the way back. Figures out he has a jetpack. Why not test that out and see if we can make faster pace? But then this is probably gonna stretch your helmet, young man. So he puts his backpack away and walks back all the way to the Beardy spacecraft, our trusted little lander, which is nothing more than a fuel tank, an engine, and a seat strapped to it, which allows us to get to the moon very, very cheaply in terms of delta V and mass budget. He spends about a day on the surface collecting additional science and then heads back up as soon as the Haddock spacecraft passes overhead. And so he actually makes it back up there with fuel to spare and plenty of oxygen, and I think he ran out of food, but there was still enough water or wine on the spacecraft to make sure that he made it all the way back to his friend. So we have an all Mediterranean crew, which is kind of fun. I wonder what they named the spacecraft. Probably after some kind of interesting food. Maybe suka is a kind of food. It's a soka. It's like a crab with chicken pea flavor that they use both in France and Italy. And I guess they named their little lander that way. Anyway, you can see them come back, heroes of the European Union or European Space Program, and making their way back. They forget to detach the service module, but no worries, it will detach automatically while burning up. And this actually happened on one of the first Soyuz flights, where was it a Soyuz or was it a Roscosmos? I don't remember which flight it was, but I remember there was a Russian spacecraft came down tumbling while the service module refused to detach until the bolts actually burned through rather than the spacecraft itself, and then self-oriented it back in the proper direction. So great resilient engineering as done with the Haddock, which has no problem coming back safely in their 2-pass re-entry. So all is safe, and Bertrand has become the second person on the moon and the first man on the moon, actually, because Michael was, of course, the first woman on the moon. But I don't think we care too much about gender at this point. Let's get them safely back, and let's go back to our space station, Spacelab Alpha. Spacelab Alpha is suffering from power loss, and I'm not sure what we've done or miscalculated, but something is drawing a humongous amount of power, and I think it has something to do with climatizing all the modules. And I thought Soyuz 1 would help, but it's not. So to avoid Valentina and Ian to suffer from power loss and subsequent suffocating, we're going to bring them home. We're going to do a small flyby and then land somewhere in the Pacific, I guess. Next up, in the end of December 26th, we see Huygens. Huygens D something. It was D something. I think it was D5. And D5 is launching to Jupiter. We have a Jupiter window coming up, and we are launching this spacecraft towards it. It is our first deep space mission, so I hope that the antennas work out. They should work out. We've done all the calculations. And I couldn't be bothered to build a Trans-Jovian insertion stage and get it all perfect lined up, because we have all this raw power on the Europa 2. And you can see us using all the engines, and you can also notice the additional thrusters that we now have mounted on the Europa 2, which allows it to precision point orbits and then softly let go of the payload, as you will see in a couple of minutes. And Huygens is it's a probe which is akin to Pioneer 10. The Americans will do this in 1973. I think it launches a couple of years earlier. But yeah, and Pioneer 10 is actually the real-life equivalent of this craft, which was the first spacecraft to pass by Jupiter. But we should beat the Americans wrong to the punch by launching this spacecraft. It is our first RTG-powered spacecraft, because all the way out to Jupiter, the sun doesn't have really that much power. So you have the inverse square root phenomena, in which the further you get away, the power actually drops dramatically. But you can also see we packed a ton of new science instruments on it. And I tried to do also a Jovian moon flyby, but it just didn't work out. They were all in the wrong position. It would take us a lot of fuel to make a flyby of one of the moons, and I decided to let go. Next up, Kepler C4. And December 27th, and you're starting to see bits and pieces that I had designed for my lunar program when I didn't have to fall back to the Haddock design in the Europa rockets. You are looking at the Kepler spacecraft. Kepler and Brahe were of course good friends. So this was designed for Luna, and it's actually very heavy, so it's launching underfueled on a Europa 2 from Surya, because you cannot launch this from the Netherlands. The base is simply too small. We're thinking about new hydrolock stages that should be able to do it, but currently we don't have the tech. So we got two special people, Maaike van den Berg and Willem from Stockholm. Willem from Stockholm was a Dutch Air Force pilot which relocated to Canada in the beginning of the Second World War, or prior to the Second World War. And he was actually a scientist, but became an Air Force pilot in Canada. Later transferred to the RAF and did up some practical experience. But he is a very unusual person, being a scientist and a pilot. So we're doing radiation testing and flying the spacecraft through these beautiful, I should say solar particles, I guess. A bit of in-flight maneuvering, orbital changes, plane maneuvering, testing the solar panels. This is a powerful spacecraft, looking a little bit like Orion or the new Chinese spacecraft designed for cislunar space. Great instrumental panels. And yeah, as we fly over the South Pole, we lose, of course, connection with our ground station, but for some reason we also lose telemetry, and we lose logging data, which is very inconvenient because we seem to have a gap in our testing protocol. And conspiracy theorists back on Earth suggest that maybe there is more to this test flight than people expect. And yeah, of course, the Dutch Space Agency is denying all kinds of such events. It's an unfortunate event in which some of the data had been lost, and basically they just went around the South Pole to take pictures of the ice, and not at all to catch up with some secret station that would be up there, which could have been photographing stuff that not at all that would be possible. And even if that were possible. These things would probably picked up a spin by now, having lost power at some point and needing manual reactivation. But none of that is of course true. You can see them test the translation mechanisms on the thrusters, and they did some additional tests to reposition the spacecraft. And once contact had been re-established, they were right on time for the re-entry over the North Sea, where Maaike and Willem are returning home for a successful test of their new spacecraft. It has some space for new docking systems in the future, which we have not invented yet, but there are some plans together with the Soviets and Americans to come up with a universal docking adapter, which would allow multiple people to actually dock spacecraft together rather than just the one we have over here. Yeah. Next up is Luna number 3. We've reached 1970. It's the January 4th. I tried to get this done in 1969, but I just couldn't. These things take quite a bit of time to build. We have Peter de Graaf, mission commander. He has been promoted from an engineer on the space station missions to becoming now the commander of the 3rd mission to the moon. Also on board is a very special guest, which is Toyohiro Akiyama, which is the mission specialist, and you remember his name. He spent lots of time on the space station, our first prototype space station, where JAXA brought in a special laboratory module to help us with the 14 days in space experiment, because our original space station's config file was a bit of corruption in there, or bad porting on my end. I'm following the devs on RP-1, and the patch for early space station seems to be almost complete, so you should be able to reproduce this yourself fairly soon once you update your RP-1 install. But it's quite an eventful flight. You can see them move. It takes about 4 days to get to the moon, and they're doing a lunar insertion. And they're trying to get the orientation correctly for the spacecraft to do their descent. And Toyohiro is the one that is going to do the landing. He's planned to descend to the surface. And Surya control is being notified of a problem. We noticed that the fairing rings seem to have lost the option to open the pedals as they did on Luna number 2. And when we're going through all the data, trying to figure out what happened, which one of the decouplers is responsible for that. But yeah, Mission Command gives the go-ahead. We decouple the Haddock spacecraft and spin it around to dock to the lander, under the assumption that the fairings are going to fall away once we decouple the lander. That's at least what we think that will happen. And you can see here, firing up that descending stage, and final time to burn off the last maybe 400 or 500 meters per second, giving us more margin on the landers. And we are targeting this landing site. And oops, as we decouple, the fairings do not come off. And telemetry reads we lost a thruster, but we've also picked up a spin. So we ripped through the aluminum casings that make up the fairings, and we lost quite a bit of traction. We also lost the solar panel. We will find that out in a minute, and we need a solar panel if we want to do the 3-day contract. But because we lost the thruster, we are desperately trying to regain control, and Toyohiro is trying desperately to save the mission by getting out of this spin, even by firing the landing and descent engine several times, deploying the landing gear. He's trying everything to get the craft back under control. I could have probably dropped off the spare packages. That might have worked if we dropped the rover and the support package, but I didn't think of that at the time. You can clearly see we're missing a thruster, and I'm trying to rotate the spacecraft to get the other 2 thrusters in the proper direction, but it's not working. And at some point, mission control says we have to abort. We're getting too close to the surface. So reluctantly, Toyohiro disengages the descent stage, decouples, and now has a rather difficult maneuver to do to catch back up with the Haddock spacecraft. I've never done this in RP-1, and let alone in in lunar orbit, but it will turn out it was not that difficult to plot a maneuver. First I'm doing a rescue maneuver to get myself an apogee which is high enough, and then I'm setting this spacecraft as a target, and I'm trying to figure out how we can get to a node where we can actually line up close enough to rendezvous. And it's gonna take some time to get it right, but we will get there. You can see me flip all the nodes around. I'm not sure how we would do this in real life. I think we would just get back into a stable orbit first and then figure out what to do. This took quite a bit of fiddling to get it right, but even if you get it within 20 kilometers or 10 kilometers, that's already pretty good. You don't need to get it right in one go. Get close, do the burn, and then do a second burn to catch up with the spacecraft. At the lower right, you can see a mod that I'm using for advanced maneuver node editing, which I rarely end up using because I still love the squat little fiddles that I have over there. But sometimes for precision moving, it's super handy. Anyway, Tokehiro has plotted his rescue burn, and he is now on his way back to the mothership. And let's just hope we get him home safely in one piece. The docking turned out to be very easy, but we lost the footage because I forgot to press record. I do have some footage of them returning home. And you can also see we dropped the numbering on the Haddock spacecraft. They're all just called Luna now. And the Haddock is coming back home, bringing Tokehiro and Peter back to our green little planet. And we've learned a lot from this mission. So you've seen we had updated the lander design and packing in a lot of kilos extra, taking away all the safety margins. But it was a tight fit. It allowed us to bring a rover, a power supply in the form of a solar panel, and food and electricity reserves, which should allow us to stay on the moon surface for 3 days. And it's kind of tricky to get it exactly right, because as I mentioned in the previous landing, you want to land a little bit eastwards of your orbit, so that after a couple of days the spacecraft catches up with your position and you can launch exactly in their inclination, avoiding this big and expensive inclination move that you have to do. Because in the beginning you still have this huge transfer stage attached, which should bring us to power, but no, it didn't. We're going to try again on the 15th of April in 1970 with Luna number 4, which is an exact copy of Luna number 3, but we fixed the fairings, of course. And you can see it launched from the larger space pad. Ian Hughes, his mission commander, he was rushed back into service after his stay on the space station. And he's on his way to the moon. But on board is as well a very special guest. So we've seen JAXA participating on the Luna 3 mission, but we have Sally Ride with us on Luna number 4. And Sally Ride is of course a NASA astronaut. So she's an American astronaut and physicist, and she flew in 1983. In real life, so about 13 years later than in our universe, and she became at that point the first woman to fly into space. And she's a very famous astronaut, spending about 340 hours in space. Unfortunately, we don't hear too much about her. She was a bit in the news when she passed away a couple of years ago, but she mainly made way for being the first lesbian astronaut, rather than being a professor emeritus of UCSD. So she was extremely smart and a skilled astronaut, so let's remember her for her accomplishments. And here she goes. She is doing the transposition and docking and bringing us together. We made it safely to the moon. You can see the paddle design coming nicely up. Sally will stay behind and command Haddock spacecraft when Ian is going to make the descent toward the moon. And of course, as a result of this cooperation, we also expect a ESA station astronaut on one of the American Apollo missions, probably on Apollo 13, not knowing how that mission was going to turn out. But you can see us doing the deceleration burn, and Ian is letting go of the spacecraft. This time everything works perfectly. And not only do the pedals explode, but they also release. We have rearranged some of the weight on the spacecraft, meaning that it's now also firing perfectly aligned from the center of mass, which is important. And this is a very, very tight mission. So the descent stage only had about 300 meters per second left when we got there. And normally it has about 400, 500. So we had to struggle with our inclinations change. And as we land at the surface, there's 60 meters per second left in the descent stage, which is not within the safety margins we're used to. But regardless, Ian makes a safe touchdown and becomes the 5th person to walk the surface on the moon after Micah, Bertrand, and of course Neil and Buzz, who have landed on the moon by now. And it's an international mission, and he has landed 20 kilometers off target. So we're doing the targeted mission program, meaning that we need to get within 1 kilometer of a particular location. Fortunately, we have brought a rover this time, a working rover that's struggling to get underneath the lander. Probably should not have put that much force on the lander itself, but yeah, regardless, it worked. We can flip over the wheels. This is the portable rover components mod, but we're not using it as components. We're using it as a build complete lander. Well, maybe try it some other point. And again, the wheels are struggling a little bit with the colliders and the terrain, but it will work. It will work. We're setting navigation to the target point, which is about 20 kilometers away. And you may have spotted on the other side of the Braille lander is a support package bringing food, water, and electricity, so we can stay on the moon for 3 days. This turned out to be a very tedious process, and I'll spare you the whole ride. But he managed to get all the way down there, get the science, and he's very tired as he gets back. He spent about 3 hours driving the distance. And he is relaxing in the spacecraft. And again, the footage of rendezvous docking got lost, but he got safely back, and he docked with Haddock with only 14 hours of oxygen left. And then we had about 100 meters per second left when we made the turn back to Earth. And that was quite the adventure, getting things safely back and getting the TLI burning around and getting everything safe, basically. So we had to use the last bit of fuels to raise our apogee to 70 kilometers, and we also ran out of liquid oxygen at this point in time. So the Haddock spacecraft has about 2 days of battery power, which we were definitely going to need. So the last day we were running on battery power only, and you can see us safely get back. We're doing our dual pass re-entry, and after the second pass, like after the first pass, you bleed off the speed, then you go back into space, cool off, and the apogee or the orbital period has dropped to about 2 hours. So after 2 hours you come back in and you make your final descent low enough in the atmosphere, and this is what you're seeing right now. They're safely coming home, and the mission is a huge success. See you in the next episode.